Hi guys, this is Miss Newbill, and what I want to do is I want to, for Black History Month, I'll be sharing with you some books and stories about African Americans who have not only made African American life great for people like myself, or but America great by their contributions and what it's meant to our everyday living. Okay. So our first book will be about George Washington Carver. Now, I'm not sure about what you know about slavery and what you've been taught, but there was a time from 1619 until 1865 where Black people, African Americans, were not free. And so when I say we're not free, literally, I mean we're property. We were considered property of the master or the slave owners. And they were taken from Africa and brought to America, mainly in the South, to either to pick the cotton and things like that, to help with, to benefit the agriculture and the way of life in the South. So when I say we're not free, I literally mean we were not free. We had no voice, we had no rights. We could not come and go as we pleased. Our names were no longer our names. So this story will begin this series, and it is called A Weed is a Flower, The Life of George Washington Carver. And the reason I'm starting with this one is because so much of what George Washington Carver discovered and did still impacts us today. All right, so let's get into it. A Weed is a Flower, The Life of George Washington Carver, written and illustrated by Alakai. George Washington Carver was born. He had many things against him. He was sick, weak, little baby. His father had just died, and his mother was left alone to care for him and for his brother James. And even worse, he was the son of slaves. There was no hope for the future. But George Washington Carver was no ordinary man. He was a man who turned evil into good, despair into hope, and hatred into love. He was a man who devoted his whole life to helping his people and the world around him. This is his story. So this is a picture of his mom. That's his brother James, and that's George right there. George Washington Carver was born in Missouri in 1860, more than 100 years ago. It was a terrible time. Mean men rode silently in the night, kidnapping slaves and for their owners and harming those who tried to stop them. One night, a band of these men rode up to the farm of Moses Carver, who owned George and his mother, Mary. Everyone ran in fear, but before Mary could hide her baby, the men snatched them both and rode away into the night. And see, this is a picture of the men. And what they used to do is they used to put hoods on their heads. And you see, the only thing you could see was their eyes, so they could see out. They didn't want people to know who they were. And see, the chain, when they went and stole slaves, they would chain them so they couldn't get away. Moses Carver sent a man to look for them. Mary was never found, but in a few days, the man returned with a small bundle wrapped in his coat and tied to the back of his saddle. It was baby George. Moses and his wife, Susan, cared for Mary's children. George remained small and weak, but as he grew, they saw that he was an unusual child. He wanted to know about everything around him. He asked about the rain, the flowers, and the insects. He asked questions that the Carvers could not answer. When he was young, George kept a garden where he spent hours each day caring for his plants. If they weren't growing well, He found out why. Soon they were healthy and blooming. In winter, he covered his plants to protect them. In spring, he planted new seeds. George looked after each plant as though it was the only one in the garden. Neighbors began to ask George's advice about their plants, and soon he was known as the plant doctor. So this is George, and this is his garden. Look, see, he's taking care of each plant. That's how he got the name. As time went on, George wondered about more and more things. He wanted to learn and yearned to go to school. In the meantime, the slaves had been freed, but schools nearby were not open to Blacks. So when he was 10, George left his brother, his garden, and the Carver farm and went off to find answers to his questions. You see, this is George. He's standing out on the outside looking at the children and the teacher there. Because again, even though Blacks were free, they could not go to school. Whenever George Washington Carver found schools, he stayed. He worked for people to earn his keep. He scrubbed their floors, washed their clothes, and baked their bread. Whatever George did, he did well. Even the smallest chore was very important to him. Some people took George in as their son. First, he stayed with Mariah and Andy Watkins, who were just like parents to him. Then he moved to Kansas, and he lived with Aunt Lucy and Uncle Seymour. They too loved this quiet boy who was so willing to help. And see, this is where, see, he's doing the chores, he's sewing socks, and he's talking to Uncle Seymour. And here, Aunt Lucy is looking at him. Look at her face. She loves him. And even George was smiling in that picture. George worked hard for many years, always trying to save up enough money for college. Other boys who had parents to help them were able to enter college at a much sooner or earlier age than George. He was 30 before he had saved enough. Still, it was not that simple. Not all colleges would admit Blacks, even if they had the money to pay. George was not discouraged. He moved to Iowa and found a college which was glad to have a Black student. At college, George continued to work. He opened a laundry where he washed his schoolmates' clothes, and he continued to learn. His teachers and friends soon realized that this earnest young man was bursting with talents. He played the piano, he sang beautifully, and he was an outstanding painter. In fact, for a time, he thought he would become an artist. Look, if you see him now, he's much older. He has his mustache, and he's painting. Let me apologize. My voice keeps fluctuating. It's going up and down, so I do apologize. I hope it's not too much of a distraction. But the more George thought of what he wanted to do, the more he wanted to help his people. And he remembered that his neighbors used to call him the plant doctor. He had never forgotten his love for plants. In all the years he had wandered, he always had something growing in his room. So George Washington Carver chose to study agriculture. He learned about plants and flowers and the soil. He learned the names of weeds. Even they were important to him. He often said, a weed is a flower growing in the wrong place. He still asked questions. If no one or book could answer him, he found the answers himself. He experimented with his own plants and found secrets that no one else knew. When George finished college, he began to teach. He was asked to go to Alabama, where a college for Blacks needed his talents. It was there at Tuskegee Institute that George Washington Carver made his life. In Alabama, Professor Carver taught his students and the poor Black farmers who earned their livelihood from the soil. He taught them how to make their crops grow better. And this is a picture of him at Tuskegee Institute. These are his students. Remember, Tuskegee Institute was a college for Black students. And there were many more around the country that opened up to allow Black students to get an education. Most of the farmers raised cotton, but sometimes the crops were destroyed by rain or insects, and the farmers couldn't earn enough to even eat. Professor Carver told them to plant other things as well. Sweet potatoes and peanuts were good crops. They were easy to grow. He said that raising only cotton harmed the soil. It would be better if different crops were planted each year. The farmers did not listen to him. They were afraid to plant peanuts and sweet potatoes. They were sure that no one would buy them. Because again, the farmers, Black farmers, they were free, but they still did not have jobs. So they got their money from what they planted and what they sold. But Professor Carver had experimented in his laboratory. He had found that many things could be made from a sweet potato. He made soup, coffee, and starch. He made more than 100 things from the sweet potato. And even though people in those days called peanuts monkey food, Professor Carver said they were good for people too. Besides, he found that still more things could be made from a peanut. Paper, ink, shaving cream, sauces, liniment, shampoo, and even milk. In fact, he made 300 different products from a peanut. Once, when important guests were expected at Tuskegee, Dr. Carter chose the menu. The guests sat around the table and enjoyed a meal of soup, cream mock chicken, bread, salad, coffee, candy cake, and ice cream. Imagine their surprise when they learned that the meal was made extremely from peanuts. Look, they're all sitting around eating. They had no idea that everything that they had eaten was from a peanut. Slowly, the farmers listened to George Washington Carver. They planted peanuts and sweet potatoes. Before they knew it, it became two of the most important crops in Alabama. And this is them. They're planting, look, they're all planting different things now. And they're not only planting cotton, but now they're beginning to listen to George Washington Carver and plant other things. Soon, the whole country knew about Dr. Carver and the great things he was doing. He was honored by presidents and other important people. Every day, his mailbox bulged with letters from farmers and scientists who wanted his advice. He was offered great sums of money, which he turned down. Money was not important to him. He did not even bother to cash many of the checks he received. Throughout his life, George Washington Carver asked nothing of others. He sought only to help. He lived alone and tended to his own needs. He washed his clothes and patched them too. He used the soap that he had made and ate the food he grew. Look, now he's older. See? Look at the plant. You remember it said he always had something growing in his room. Here's one, a small one right here, right? He only wanted to help others. Dr. Carver was asked to speak in many parts of the world, but he did not leave Tuskegee often. He had things to do. He continued to paint. He worked in his greenhouse and in his laboratory, where he discovered many things. He discovered that dyes could be made from plants and colors from the Alabama clay. Even when he was over 80 and close to death, Dr. Carver kept working night after night while the rest of the town lay asleep. A light still shone in his window. See right here? And the town is sleeping, but he did not sleep. He kept working because he needed to continue to give to people. The baby born with no hope for the future grew into one of the greatest scientists of this country. George Washington Carver, with the goodness and devotion, helped not only his own people, but all people of the world. So now, the book is called A Weed is a Flower. Remember what he said. A weed is a flower. A weed is a flower just growing in the wrong place. So why did I pick this book, right? I picked George Washington Carver because I needed to thank him, okay? I needed to let you all know about what he contributed to our everyday living now. The milk we drink in the cafeteria, we, you know, the soups we eat, the dyes in our clothes, everything boils down to something that Dr. Carver did. And we as African Americans, we need to congratulate, we need to thank the people who came before us. And if you look behind me, my board in the back, right? It reads, I'm going to turn it this way. Let's honor our past, celebrate our present, and inspire and educate our future. Okay, because without African Americans, this country may not be the way that it is today. Um, the sweet potato, the peanut, all the things that Dr. Carver contributed to our lives, to our country, to my people, his people, and the world. If there were not for George Washington Carver, I'm not sure what things would look like now. And again, if you look at the back of the board, a lot of us know about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and um, other, noted African Americans, especially during Black History Month. Then we know that those people laid the groundwork, and they did. And I am so grateful for the marches and the sit-ins that they did, because what it did is it allowed me to have the job I have. It allows me not to only work in a school targeting African Americans or built for African Americans. It allows me to live in any community I choose to live in. Okay, so it is through their work that I am here today, that I am here doing the thing that I love to do, which is sharing kindness, sharing love, sharing behaviors with you all, showing you different ways to handle different emotions, different techniques. So it is because of the people behind me and Dr. Carver and many more that has given me the life that I've given, because they sacrificed theirs. Some died, some were beaten, some were just brutality. So I owe it to them. And there's a phrase that people say, it's on their shoulders I stand. And hopefully, if I do my job and educate and inspire our future, hopefully one day someone will be standing on mine. Because if so, then that means that I've done what I was supposed to do. So this is the beginning of a series that I will be reading different stories. I want to introduce you to different people, or reintroduce you to people. Say LeBron James, for instance. Everyone knows him as probably one of the most spectacular basketball players of all time. He will go down in history as the most fierce Black basketball player. But did you know that he has created a school, and it's called the Promise School? The tuition is free. He did it in his community. I bet you didn't know that. But so not only is he an excellent basketball player, um, he's also a wonderful human being. He's fighting for and giving the people in his community a chance. And that's what I hope to do. Many of you know I don't live in McDowell County anymore, but I did. I was raised and educated right here in McDowell County. And I love being here. I love giving back to a county that has helped shape me into the person I am today. So why George Washington Carver again? Let me say this. George Washington Carver was born a slave. The odds of him ever being who he was and turned out to be were very slim. And sometimes you all may hear that people in McDowell County are this or that, and we don't have this or we don't have that. But that has nothing to do with who you can be. It has nothing to do with it. It is the present, but it does not have to shape your future. Okay. I want you to dream, just like ask questions. And if you can't find the answer, ask someone else. Read a book. If it's not in a book, George Washington Carver, he found his answers because during his time, no one could answer those questions, which made him a wonderful, excellent, one of the world's greatest scientists. And so I want you all to do like George Washington Carver did. Be who you want to be. Dream and dream big. Be who you were created to be. Nothing too small, nothing's ever too big. So I wanted to share his story, his life story with you, and I'll share some other stories about other people. But what I want to leave you with is you do not have to remain in your current circumstance, just like George Washington Carver did not. He was born with no parents. His mom was stolen away from him. His father died. He was a slave. He had no freedom. He had no voice. He had a master. So, but that he didn't let that hold him back. And whatever adversity you may be experiencing now in your life, don't let that hold you back. Let that be a motivator. Let that push you to be everything and all that you hope to be. And hopefully, if you have any questions, if I can't answer it, I'll find you the answer. Okay. So thank you for spending this time and space with me. And I will be back again to read another story about the great life and contributions of an African American during Black History Month. So stay safe. Remember, social distance, wash your hands, wear your mask always. Just because you don't see me in my mask, I keep one handy. So take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.